Welcome to Princeton TV. We're here with Arturo Munoz at RAND Corporation. He's a senior political scientist, covers all of South Asia. He has many, many years of CIA experience in counterinsurgency, counterterrorism. So today we're going to focus on Pakistan and Afghanistan. America's relationship with Pakistan has been at a low point, yet Washington still provides huge quantities of military and economic aid to Pakistan. A new Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif, has been re-elected. He's come back from exile after almost 20 years of being out of power. U.S. has given on the order of $25 billion of aid to Pakistan since 2001. Pakistan and the U.S. are on the opposite sides of the war in Afghanistan. Pakistan supports, obviously with the ISI, supports the Taliban, while the U.S. has been trying to fight the Taliban. And U.S. depends on on Pakistan for the supply route out of Afghanistan as the drawdown comes closer. And of course, inside Pakistan, U.S. has been running a drone war every night, which has been highly controversial, even in the campaign that Nawaz Sharif just ran. Interestingly, Nawaz Sharif did not go as far as Imran Khan, who said that we should be shooting down
That's right.
American planes using American F-16s, American drone planes using American F-16s. But of course, Nawaz Sharif wants to talk about and negotiate the end to the drone war. So how do you see this development, Dr. Munoz, Nawaz Sharif coming back into office in Pakistan?
Well, I think it's very positive.
Okay.
Because he has a lot of experience and he is determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. And so far he said all the right things. I mean, he wants to, as you mentioned, wants to negotiate with the United States, and the way he said it, sit down with our American friends to discuss the drones and other bilateral issues that have been a source of discord. He also wants to make peace with India. This is very important for Pakistan. He is convinced that for Pakistan to grow economically and to produce employment and to have economic progress, they have to have more trade with India. They have to have better relations with India. So he's determined to do that. He's also made very positive remarks about the peace negotiations with the Taliban. He's also extended, a positive message to Karzai. So it seems that he's, touching all the buttons, saying all the right things.
Right.
The question is whether or not he'll be able to deliver on all these good intentions.
Right. So, according to recent reports, for instance, Bruce Riedel at Brookings calls him the comeback kid of Pakistani politics, having been re-elected now for the third term. Apparently, he was in exile, right, in Saudi Arabia for many years.
Right.
Musharraf had almost put him on the execution list for treason, and now, ironically, Musharraf is in jail under house arrest and cannot run for political office. So it appears that the fault lines that Nawaz Sharif would have to bridge include huge challenges. For instance, he would have to build some sort of a bridge between civil society and the military and the ISI in Pakistan, which is a huge task.
Oh, absolutely. It won't be easy at all.
Right.
It'll be very difficult. And he may not be able to do it. However, he intends to do it. And he has an advantage also in this time around, that the Pakistani military realizes that security is necessary and that changes have to take place in order for Pakistan to progress. So I actually think that the Pakistani military is more amenable to the types of reforms that Nawaz Sharif wants to implement than ever before. Because I think there is a sense of crisis in Pakistan because primarily for the economic issue. You have very high unemployment.
Yeah.
You have an energy problem where most areas in Pakistan don't have energy 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not just a matter of convenience. I mean, if you're running a business, if you're having a factory,
right.
if you have any kind of local industry, you need energy.
Right.
So these are very serious problems that Pakistan has to face. Nawaz Sharif actually has a good background. He has a business background. When he was in power, he actually did reforms of the Pakistani steel industry. Mm-hmm. And he made the steel industry more productive and more profitable. And I actually think the Pakistani army, which has great economic interests, great interest in the Pakistani economy, are actually willing to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm. And of course, he also has to build a bridge, as you mentioned earlier, with India and other neighbors in South Asia.
Well, that is correct. He actually tried to do that the first time he was in power.
Okay.
At that time, all the evidence that you read is that the Pakistani army was opposed to that and blocked it. This time around, I actually think that the Pakistani army realizes that having a perpetual...
Well, they didn't even just block it, they started the Kargil War.
That's right.
Under Musharraf.
That's right.
And then he came to the White House, he met with Bill Clinton,
right.
And then he deposed Musharraf, and Musharraf
right.
Ousted him in a coup.
That is correct. But I think that attitudes have changed.
Okay.
And I think that there is a sense of economic crisis in Pakistan that kind of supersedes the old, assumptions.
So are you saying that Nawaz Sharif is now kind of the U.S. man in Pakistan?
No, I wouldn't call him.
Oh, he's democratically elected, of course, with a large margin.
He was democratically elected, but that doesn't make him the U.S. man.
Okay.
I mean, he has made overtures to the
Well, of course,
United
he's
States.
from Punjab, right, which is obviously the heavily populous area
Yeah.
of Pakistan, and so
Sure.
he garnered a lot of votes from Punjab.
Sure. And an important point I'd like to stress on the votes that he got is that he is known to be a secular candidate.
Okay.
I mean, he's considered secular. Even though he has alliances with Islamists and he's flirted with Islamists in the past, but I think basically his party is a secular party.
Well, Lashkar-e-Toiba apparently has a base inside Punjab itself, right? The group that did the Mumbai terror attack.
That doesn't mean that they have the approval of Nawaz Sharif to do that. I mean, it just indicates that there are deep divisions in Pakistani society.
So this would be the other bridge that he would have to build, right? He would have to somehow bring the religious extremists within the Taliban or outside the Taliban into the civic, dialogue or discourse with.
I think that's absolutely correct,
Right.
and he has given indications that he wants to do that. Now, he has a strong hand to do that. In these last elections, I think it's quite significant to point out that the Islamists did not do well at all.
Mm-hmm.
They had a chance to, gain a lot of votes, and they didn't. The Pakistani electorate, by and large, picked secular parties. So I think that this gives Nawaz Sharif a stronger hand in dealing with the Islamists, because he can point to Pakistani public opinion and Pakistani voting, the will of the Pakistani people as expressed in the elections, and overwhelmingly they picked secular parties, one, and they rejected violence, because the Taliban and other radical groups, not to be confused with the Islamists, those are two different things,
Right.
but the radicals had a campaign against the secular parties. They attacked the secular parties with bombings, with assassinations, with kidnappings.
Right.
They said it publicly. We are attacking the secular parties because this is wrong for Pakistan. Well, the Pakistani people resoundingly did not agree.
So this is a big point, right? Because in the 60 plus year history of Pakistan, this is the first time, I believe, where a succession of democratically elected governments have come into power. For majority of its independent rule, Pakistan's been governed by military dictators.
Well, this is significant on several different levels. It's
Okay.
a peaceful turnover of power. by
From Zardari to
that's right.
Nawaz Sharif. From PPP to
that's right.
the Muslim League.
A peaceful turnover of power by a democratic election.
Right.
And the other significant thing is the secular parties clearly won the majority. This is the preference of the Pakistani people.
Okay.
And it's also very evident that the Pakistani people do not accept the violence espoused by the jihadists. The jihadists come out of this looking like a very small, marginalized minority, and the only reason people pay attention to them, in a certain sense, is because they conduct violence. That's why they do violence, because they don't have the popular support, so they have to impose themselves through violence. And the Pakistani people overwhelmingly rejected that violence.
Now, one thing that, of course, in the reporting that's come out is that that Nawaz Sharif did not overtly come out and say anything against the religious extremists during the campaign, and even kind of in his other statements that he's made. He's openly talked about, of course, making friends with India and making bridges with the military and the ISI, but he hasn't said anything about religious extremism. Again, obviously because of the blasphemy laws and the killings that have happened as a result of that, right?
But
so this is still the kind of the deep divide, right?
Well, yes, there's no doubt that there's a deep divide, but I think Nawaz Sharif wants to leave his options open so that hopefully in the future he can negotiate a peace settlement with at least some of the radicals or some of the Islamists. Now you got to make a big distinction between Islamists and radicals. They're not the same. But I think Nawaz Sharif this time around wants to leave the door open. So therefore, why make any statement that'll come back to haunt him later?
Right.
I think he wants to have his options, as many options as possible to negotiate, because the main thing he wants is to bring about security so that Pakistan can progress economically.
Okay.
That's actually his main agenda, the economic progress of Pakistan.
Okay.
And he doesn't want to get a fight with the terrorists, to ruin this plan.
So you're hopeful this time around that something concrete will be achieved in terms of a strong relationship with India, and he would be able to bring kind of the civil society to bear on the military establishment and the ISI, and have the judiciary play a more active role in containing the various elements, whether it's military, the ISI, or the religious groups, into the civil dialogue within civil society itself.
I think there are many factors promoting that outcome now, more than ever before. I think there are many advantages for that position. However, there's also a lot of negatives in the equation. There's also a lot of people that don't want security, that don't want peace. There are very strong interest groups at play. Whether or not Nawaz Sharif will be able to fulfill his agenda, it's really too early to tell. The man just got elected.
Right. No, but we know who he is. I mean,
we know who he is.
We know him from his previous terms.
For sure, and see, you got to be careful. There's the old adage, history repeats itself. But I think that Nawaz is aware of that, and he doesn't want history to repeat itself.
Right. Okay.
And I really do think people can change, and I believe that he is going to use his experience to try to pursue policies that will create security and progress.
So let's shift. You've just come back from Afghanistan. So now this obviously would be very important, right? In terms of how Afghanistan works out, or with the drawdown in 2014.
It's critical.
It's critical, right?
Yes.
It's a critical piece of the puzzle.
It's a critical piece of the puzzle to the security of Pakistan.
Right.
And let me address a comment in your opening remarks about Pakistan supporting the Taliban. That's absolutely true. There are elements of ISI in the Pakistani military that have supported the Taliban since day one.
Right.
But there's also some elements that don't. And right now, for example, you take the case of Mullah Fazlullah. Well, the Pakistani army's complaining that here it's the reverse. He's taking cross-border refuge in Afghanistan. They're saying Afghanistan is a refuge for terrorists.
I see.
In the case of Mullah Fazlullah. who was actually crossed,
Okay.
and then he crossed the border
Okay.
to Konar
Right.
or Nuristan. He's either in Konar or Nuristan. I
see.
believe it's Konar.
I
Well,
see.
he has crossed the border back into Pakistan to attack the Pakistani military.
I see.
So the Pakistanis are attacking Mullah Fazlullah, who calls himself a Taliban. So there is combat going on between Pakistani military and Taliban. So it's a contradictory situation.
Right. So this morning, though, the news was 6 more Americans were killed in another suicide attack,
Okay.
along with 10, I think, or 11 Afghan civilians and soldiers in Kabul. So what is the, I know when I spoke with you last time, you said, yes, these are, these sort of minor incidents, kind of explosions that do take place, but for the most part, the Taliban has not been able to make a dent in, in the Karzai government or with the ISAF or with the American troops and forces that are still there, although diminishing in numbers, right?
Right.
So do you have a count? I mean, I know there's an estimate, but do you have a count in terms of how many troops are still there and will be left relative to how many Taliban are out there in Afghanistan? Mostly in the southern provinces?
Well, they're steadily withdrawing, and the whole strategy is for the U.S. forces, combat forces, to be out of Afghanistan by 2014. So even now, the combat role is being greatly reduced. I mean, all the reporting that you see now talks increasingly about the Afghan army taking the lead, which is the plan, which is exactly the military plan. And it is happening, and I think there's a lot of good reporting about successful operations conducted by the Pakistani military, especially the Pakistani special forces, against the enemy. Well, there's a couple of issues here. One is how many troops are going to remain in an advisory position and a training capacity. The numbers go up and down depending on who you talk to and what meeting is held, and it's very much up in the air. And a lot of this, of course, is contingent on a status of forces agreement.
Okay.
I mean, what I've been saying for a year is that the optimal number would be 30,000 U.S. forces staying behind. But the estimates have gone down to as low as 10, and sends mixed signals. Because he recently said the U.S. Should keep 9 bases open in Afghanistan.
In the different provinces,
In the different provinces.
Yeah, including the southern provinces, right?
Well, yeah.
Which is where the Taliban is the strongest.
The south and the east.
Yeah.
And if you're going to take him at his word, you're going to have 9 bases. Well, that sounds like 30,000 troops.
Right.
And that sounds like a pretty active presence.
Right.
But again, the idea is that the U.S. soldiers are not going to do the fighting themselves. The Afghans are going to do it.
Right.
U.S. soldiers will be in a support role. And I think everybody agrees with that strategy.
Well, this is what Martin Dempsey as well, I guess in a conference said yesterday or the day before, chairman of the Joint Chief of Staffs, that we're working out the strategy. How this will be implemented remains to be seen, whether it will be a regional approach where we train, advise, and give assistance to the ISAF forces, or an institutional, like a top-down approach where the U.S. sort of retains stronger control. And then advises ISAF, whether it's the brigades or the corporals or the Kandak, the Afghan sort of actual troops itself. So it's yet to be determined. But the point is, the strategy. I guess you have 18 months to kind of fully flush out the exact implementation of a strategy on the ground. Is that right? Is that your understanding as well?
Well, yeah. Sure.
Okay. But you were just there, so what is it that you can tell us that's kind of interesting, innovative, or new about what it is U.S. plans to do there?
I think, a report came out recently about interviews done with former Taliban and current Taliban, basically arguing that they are completely uncowed, undefeated, that they are all very fervent jihadists, and they're willing to fight forever. and basically the U.S. military intervention has not made a dent on them. You know, to turn around the phrase you used earlier, they haven't made a dent on us.
Right.
There's also a contrary argument that says we haven't made a dent on. Here's the point I want to make.
Yeah.
There's other interviews that paint a different picture of the Taliban, that they're not such intense jihadists, that actually, especially when you talk about local Taliban, you know, their frame of reference is their community. And if they believe that their community is better off by making a deal with the government, then they'll do it. And there's actually many former Taliban who are now in ALP. So they are patrolling their own communities. And what I have seen is that district level Taliban commanders are actually quite willing to negotiate. And although they always talk about the Islamic Emirate, when you really discuss in detail what they want, what they want usually has to do with local issues. You know, they want to have their families protected. They want to have authority at the local level. In other words, they're not motivated by some grand vision of world jihad. That's not their motivation. Their motivation is local. And they are practical, they are pragmatic. They are willing to make deals if they believe that they can achieve their local objectives. They're not the intransigent jihadist force that some scholars paint them to be. Now, you do have the intransigent jihadists who are the way the scholars paint them. See, that's the problem. It's a heterogeneous movement. You have different kinds of Taliban. You have local Taliban. The local Taliban interviews that I've seen make frequent reference to Taliban from Pakistan, whom they consider to be very different. Right. The foreign Taliban. You have the Taliban that are very much into the Deobandi ideology and the Salafi Wahhabi ideology. They're a minority. So it's a mixed bag. My point is that from a counterinsurgency point of view, looking at it district by district, I think that there's a lot of possibilities for negotiating with the local Taliban and actually bringing a cessation of violence, which is what Karzai had always said that he was trying to do.
So the British historian that I interviewed last week I think it was, he narrates a narrative kind of similar to yours, but apparently the warlords on the ground in Kabul and elsewhere tell him these are the last days of the Americans, you know, very much like the previous empires.
Right.
And the Chinese are next, who are buying, you know, huge quantities of mineral rights inside China. They're trying to orchestrate their dealings with inside Afghanistan. Right. Of course, they're very closely allied with Pakistan on the other side of the border. Right. But they're trying to enter Afghanistan in a different way. They're not they're not interested in occupying Afghanistan, but they're interested in, you know, dealing and wheeling and making trade deals and owning the mineral rights, and then trying to do development inside Afghanistan. Is that what you observed as well? The Chinese strategy kind of playing out already in Kabul and elsewhere?
There's no doubt about it. Chinese influence is increasing.
Okay.
But the Chinese, again, are being very circumspect in the way that they intervene in Afghanistan. Okay. They are focusing exclusively on the economic front, on the mineral resources. And they're very careful not to get involved in local politics. Okay. You know, they avoid it. So, to what degree the Chinese are going to have a political influence in Afghanistan, that's highly debatable. That they're going to have a major economic influence, absolutely. And you can see that already. And this is open. There's mining concessions that the Chinese have. So the Chinese obviously feel that the resources of Afghanistan is something they should pursue, and they are pursuing it. Now, they have an interest in security, all right, because they cannot exploit the resources of Afghanistan if you have IEDs going off, suicide bombers going off. So it's in their interest to also bring about a cessation of violence.
But are they giving aid to Pakistan as well, to the order that America and NATO is investing?
I do not. I actually don't have any data on Chinese aid to Pakistan, but I assume it's a lot less.
Or to Afghanistan, for that matter.
Or to Afghanistan. Oh, I assume it's much less. But let me say something about the alliance that you mentioned between China and Pakistan. Yes, everybody knows that, and partly because they're both against India.
Which is the other leg of the stool, if you will.
But here's the point that we should also consider. Again, many of these situations are contradictory. The Chinese have a political alliance with the Pakistani. However, the Chinese also have an Islamic radical separatist problem in their country with the Uyghurs. And they actually do not agree with the Pakistani support for Islamic separatists, because that affects them ultimately.
And you also have the Uzbeks and
that's right.
And the other minority groups as well in China.
The Chinese certainly have interests in Pakistan and Afghanistan, but that doesn't mean that they go along with everything that the Pakistanis do. Some of the things the Pakistanis do are contrary to Chinese interests.
Okay. So it's a complex region. It's a region that we have to watch closely as we move forward.
Correct.
But I think on the whole, though, I think what you're saying is that the Nawaz Sharif election turnout is a positive development for the region. But this is something that has to be monitored as we go forward.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, because there are many actors out there that don't want Nawaz Sharif to succeed.
To succeed, yeah.
Now, there are some that do, but I think it's possible in certain areas. In terms of the country in general, will there be a civil war? I think it's very, again, contradictory. There's evidence arguing in favor of that scenario, but there's a lot of evidence arguing against. First of all, let's talk about the Taliban taking over as we withdraw. This is a scenario painted by a lot of observers. And in some cases, again, this is why Afghanistan is so complicated. Yes, there are some districts where that has actually happened already. All right, the Taliban are back.
In the southern areas, you mean?
In some districts in the south, some districts in the east.
Okay.
The reason I emphasize some is because you've got some that hasn't happened. All right, you take, for example, Garmsir. Carter Malkasian spent 2 years there, just wrote a book about his experiences there. Now, this used to be a Taliban stronghold. The Marines went in, the U.S. counterinsurgency doctrine was applied, the much maligned coin, that everybody criticizes nowadays. However, in the case of Garmsir, it seemed to work. And right now, Garmsir is not under Taliban control, and there's a lot of people in Garmsir, and this is something Carter Malkasian emphasizes, that remain anti-Taliban and don't want to be under Taliban control.
I see.
So now the Marines are gone. The Marines are gone. Has Garmsir fallen to the Taliban? No. Now, some other areas where the Taliban were, has the Taliban come back? Yes. So it depends, community by community, on the local strength of the Taliban, the local popularity of the Taliban. But I would argue that there are many cases where the local communities don't want the Taliban.
Okay, so what are those areas, though, that you think are kind of suspect or questionable could go to Taliban?
Well, it's all in the south and the east.
So Kandahar being the central kind of area that...
I don't know that the whole city of Kandahar will go to the Taliban. There's a lot of people there that don't want to live under the Taliban. For a variety
that was their stronghold, right? I mean, in the old days.
It was their stronghold in the old days. That's true.
Yeah.
But, in 2001, when the U.S. intervened, there was not a lot of outpouring of support for the Taliban. I think the Taliban were a little bit shocked that the Afghan people did not rise up against the foreigners.
So is there a civil society, you would say, in Afghanistan now, in Kabul and other areas, that would take hold of the democratic process and run with it?
Absolutely, there's a civil society. There's been a lot of civil society programs that have been implemented. And I think you are seeing a political awareness.